Hey friends, welcome back to Odash YouTube channel. Since Adobe Photoshop version CC 2019, Adobe introduced a new way of selecting objects, which is very easy. Let me show you. For that, you need to select a selection tool. For example, Quick Selection tool. Then you will see a new button in the options bar, which is Select Subject. Remember, this button is only there if you're using Adobe Photoshop version 20.1 or latest. So you simply click the Select Subject button and it will analyze the image for a couple of seconds, and eventually it will select the subject, or if there are more than one subject, it will select all of them. Zooming in, you can see here the selection is pretty much okay, but where there is not enough contrast, it just went over all around. So this tool basically works best if your image has a high contrast between the subject and the background. So let's see, by panning the image with the spacebar key held down on the keyboard, as you can see, it has missed some areas where there is not enough contrast. But that's okay. You can simply fine-tune this selection by going to Select and Mask. Now, Select and Mask is another topic for another time, which is one of the best selection methods in Adobe Photoshop. So we'll leave it here. My main intention was to let you guys know about the Select Subject option in Adobe Photoshop. So today we will gonna learn about the Object Selection tool, which is new in Adobe Photoshop CC 2020. This is the Object Selection tool, and all tools in the same group have the same shortcut key, which is indeed the W key. Okay, we are back in Adobe Photoshop. So as I told you earlier, you can use the Select Subject button in the options bar by selecting any tool in this group, like Object Selection tool or the Quick Selection tool, or even the old, good and classic Magic Wand tool. Both of these buttons will appear at the options bar, Select Subject and Select and Mask. Remember, Select and Mask is there for fine-tuning your selection. So now we will move back to the new tool, Object Selection tool. The main purpose of this tool is to select a single object. This is very fast, but I will not recommend using this tool unless you are very familiar with fine-tuning selections in Adobe Photoshop. So for example, by using Object Selection tool, I will simply draw a rectangle around the girl in the red here. So I will see what this tool does and how good it works. So by zooming in with Control Space on my keyboard, you can see it did a pretty good job here. We will look around the edges. The hair are not an issue, as you can use another methods like Select and Mask to fine-tune them. Now, I will press Ctrl 0 on my keyboard to zoom out this image and fit it to the screen. Now, I will do the same thing by drawing a rectangle around the second subject. As you can see, the other girl in the red is now deselected. That's because we didn't press Shift right. So I will hit undo here by pressing Ctrl Z on my keyboard. Now what if I press Shift key? Then you can see your mouse pointer has a plus sign at the bottom right of it. Now I will drag another rectangle on the girl in the yellow dress. As you can see, now both of the subjects are selected. Now I will do the same thing here. I will zoom in to the girl in the yellow. Now I will pan the image by pressing and holding down the space bar on my keyboard, and I will see how good it looks. Okay, good enough. Some areas need fine-tuning, like this area here, and in the bottom there was not enough contrast, so it made actually a pretty good job. Kudos to Adobe team there for making such an exciting and easy feature in Adobe Photoshop. So let me tell you how this method works, like selecting subject or even the object selection tool. Actually, these tools work by the machine learning technology. What Adobe did is to pass thousands and thousands of images through Adobe Photoshop, and they told Adobe Photoshop what is the background and where is the subject. So Adobe Photoshop tried to learn and learn, so finally it started to pick up subjects in the images. So this is the AI technology, artificial intelligence technology, or you can call it the machine learning technology. There are some other options and features in Adobe Photoshop too, which uses the same technology. For example, the content-aware scale tool or content-aware fill tool uses the same machine learning technology. As you have seen, first we used the select subject option in the options bar. It went so far so it couldn't help selecting the clouds in the background because there was not enough contrast between the object and the background. So we tried the new object selection tool, which pretty much worked very well. So what is more in the object selection tool here? Let's see. Now I will simply press the Alt key to minus the girl selection from the image. Now you can see the clouds are still selected. I will also press Alt and minus this selection, and this one here too. The cap of the girl is still selected. Now we will remove this selection too by pressing Alt and dragging through it. Now I will zoom in to the first image here. Now to fine-tune the selection with the same tool, which is object selection tool, you can press Shift to add something into the selection, or you can simply press Alt to minus from the selection or subtract from it. Same thing we used in the marquee selection tools and the lasso selection tools. So I will see by zooming in more what area needs fine-tuning, what needs to be added into the selection, and what needs to be subtracted from the selection. So I think here a little bit pixels are out of the selection. I will pan around the image to see if any pixels need fine-tuning. So I will draw with the Shift key and try creating a rectangle to see if the outer pixels which are not selected are added into the selection. As you can see, it added some pixels but also went over the board. So I will press the Alt key here and try to remove this area. Now for this area which is still selected, you can switch to any lasso tool or marquee tool and press Alt key to subtract it from the selection. Now I will switch to the lasso tool by pressing L on my keyboard, and by pressing and holding down Alt on my keyboard, I can remove this area from the selection. Now I will switch back to the object selection tool by pressing W on my keyboard and pan around the image to see if something else needs fine-tuning here. These areas are still selected, as you can see on your screen. I will again use the lasso tool and subtract these areas from the selection. So this is where lasso tools come handy when using selections. Now I will press Ctrl 0 to fit image on the screen. With the object selection tool, you can go to its option bar like new selection, add to selection, subtract from selection, and intersect with selections. We already covered these topics in the previous videos, so make sure you check them. Next thing is the mode, which is rectangle or lasso. It means you can use lasso tool to actually Try and select an area. For example, I use the lasso tool here. It is not actually lasso tool, but just a mode for the object selection tool. As you can see, it did a pretty good job in selecting the other girl in yellow color. Now I will switch back this option to rectangle, and there is another option which is sample all layers. If you select sample all layers and you have more than one layer in this area, it will sample this layer and all the layers beneath. So make sure this option is turned off if you're not expecting what is going on here. In the next video, we will see what does Quick Selection tool do, which is the best tool to select objects in Adobe Photoshop. Remember, object selection tool, magnetic lasso tool, and select subject option only works by finding contrast in your images. So if all the tools fail, that means there is not enough contrast between the subject and the background in your image.